Hello guys and welcome to another Star Wars Top 5. This episode is going to be a little bit different than usual because instead of talking about either legends or canon, we're talking about the real world. And specifically, today we're looking at the top 5 best-selling Star Wars video games. So a few notes about this list before we get started, and the first is that we're only going to include one LEGO Star Wars video game because if we included them all, they would dominate the list and it wouldn't be very interesting. Secondly, we're only looking at full, paid released games, so no apps, no Star Wars Angry Birds. Finally, the metric I used for ranking this list was units shipped, not money earned. That's largely because the value of $1 has changed over time, modern games have DLC and microtransactions, so just to keep it more interesting, I thought I would go with total games sold. That also has the effect of excluding the Old Republic from this list because, well, and make some decent money, it only actually shipped a couple of million units. Alright, so at number 5, we actually had a tie between two different games, and that was the Revenge of the Sith video game that came out along with the movie in 2005, and a fan favorite, Star Wars Battlefront 1. I've given the 5 spot to Revenge of the Sith, and that's despite the fact that Battlefront 1 actually sold 10,000 more units, and I've done so because we've got two Battlefront games coming up further on. I thought it'd be interesting to look at something else. So I'm fairly certain that this game sold so well, and I think most people would probably agree, because it came out 10 days before the movie. I rented this game when it came out, and I remember, although the gameplay was pretty mediocre, and of course, it was interesting because it followed the plot of the movie basically exactly, it was incredibly short, and you could easily beat it in one sitting. So you played as either Obi-Wan or Anakin depending on the mission, and again, this was a pretty standard movie tie-in. It certainly wasn't groundbreaking and probably doesn't really deserve the 5th spot on this list. It did kind of have some cool alternate endings and whatnot, but still, it wasn't really worth the money at the time, at least in my opinion. And really, the fact that a game can sell so much just by being tied into a movie really further convinces me that Disney made a huge mistake in not releasing a Force Awakens game along with Episode 7. Especially where Christmas was coming up. I mean, that could have been a really popular stocking stuffer, but I don't know, what do I know? Number 4 is Battlefront II, the 2005 version, and this came out on the PS2, the Xbox, the PSP, and the PC, and it sold 6.58 million units. This is one of those games that succeeded mostly, I think, because it was just pure fun to play, and I think anyone who has played it would probably attest to that, especially if you could get a group of friends over to play some multiplayer. The game certainly wasn't perfect. I mean, the graphics were not outstanding and the AI definitely left a lot to be desired, but it did do a great job of making you feel like you were in the Star Wars universe. Also, I think Battlefront 2 is really a sequel that kind of improved on its predecessor in most ways. It kept most of what we liked about the first game, like the game modes, the ships, the vehicles, and the maps, while also adding things like space battle modes. My favorite thing about this game, other than, of course, getting a bunch of friends over to play Galactic Conquest, was being able to drive any vehicle that you saw on the map. You see an AT-AT, you can get in it. You see an X-Wing, you can fly around. And this is something that, in my opinion, was sorely missing in the new EA Battlefront. Number 3 was really surprising for me, and it's The Force Unleashed. The Force Unleashed came out on Xbox 360, PS3, Wii, PlayStation 2, PlayStation Portable, Nintendo DS, and sold a combined total of 10.5 million units. And I knew this game was successful, but I didn't know it was that successful, and I would never have guessed that it would have outsold Battlefront 1 and 2. And I think that this can possibly be attributed to the fact that there weren't really many Star Wars video games coming out at the time. There were certainly no movies coming out, so people were itching for new Star Wars content. And you can compare that to the last two items on the list, which came out in the same year and also the same year as Episode 3. The Force Unleashed was an interesting game. It was really fun, but probably a little too short. This game really divided people, and the people that were for it cited its fun gameplay and how powerful it made you feel as a Jedi, and people that were against it cited its short length and its kind of weird story. And I think both of those sides are best captured by the scene where Starkiller pulls the Star Destroyer out of orbit, crashing it into the planet. The Force Unleashed 2 would later be released, but it was even shorter and kind of more nonsensical even than the first one. And I just played through it recently, and it seems like it was clearly very rushed, which I find to be kind of surprising based on the fact that the first one sold so many units. It seems like the second one could have been a real hit had they put some effort into it. Number 2 is Star Wars Battlefront, the EA version that came out in 2015. This game was released for the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, and the PC, and sold 13.19 million units. And this is a pretty big jump even from The Force Unleashed, and Battlefront EA sold more than Battlefront II and Battlefront 1 combined. I think this is largely due to the fact that in 2015 there were even less Star Wars video games than in 2008, and the fact that now marketing and online marketing is so pervasive. We see, ads for video games basically every time we open a YouTube video. I've expressed my disappointment in this game before, and there are a few choices that EA made that I strongly disagree with. First thing is, I feel like they kind of managed to make the battles feel a little less epic, and that's despite the fact that, there's a lot more resources available to them in the environments, and the graphics are a lot more beautiful, but doing things like taking away the ability to get into vehicles and having to summon them, and just the battle feels a lot less natural, just takes away from how fun the game is. Also, they released a ton of DLC, which I know really segmented the population even with the 13.2 million sales. I don't know, this game just felt really polished, but really shallow. Now, of course, we've got Battlefront 2 coming up, and it'll probably tie in with Episode 8 in some way, but I don't see the sales reaching the level it did in 2015 unless the game really knocks everything they need to out of the park. Alright, so we're on to number 1, and it's the behemoth that is LEGO Star Wars, and I mentioned before that LEGO Star Wars would have occupied multiple positions on this list if I didn't kind of narrow it to just one game. The best-selling LEGO Star Wars game was unsurprisingly the Complete Edition, and this had both the prequel trilogy games and the sequel trilogy games within it. It came out on the Wii, the DS, the 360, the PlayStation 3, and sold 15.29 million units. These games do so well for a couple of reasons, and I think the first is that they're legitimately fun and they're very well made, and like most LEGO games, they have a lot of charm to them. And also, with this game, it was like you were getting multiple games within it, so the value was really there, especially for parents. These games were also really kid-friendly. I mean, you could give it to your child and they would have a lot of fun. You wouldn't have to worry about them getting stuck or, running into anything they shouldn't, but on the other hand, they were really fun to even play as an adult, and they weren't too childish or easy. And the core game mechanics are solid. And really, the combination of the LEGO brand and the Star Wars brand is just a match made in heaven. Star Wars has a lot of charm to it, LEGO has a lot of charm to it, so you combine those and you get just a game with a lot of humor, a lot of fun, and really most importantly, one that sold 15.29 million units and continues to sell on a pretty regular basis. Anyways guys, those were the top 5 best-selling Star Wars video games. But of course, these games aren't necessarily the best, and they're certainly not my favorite. I mean, I was a huge fan of Battlefront 2, but there are a ton of games that I really liked that weren't even close to cracking the list. So for example, Shadows of the Empire, Rogue Squadron on the N64, Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast for the PC, which I will say in my opinion does a better job of making you feel like a Jedi than The Force Unleashed. And of course, probably my all-time favorites, Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. Now I'm going to put an Amazon link in the description to all of these games, those that I just mentioned and the top 5 on the list. If you want to support the channel, buy something from that link because it throws a little bit of money my way, and hey, you also get yourself a new video game. So I've got a few questions for you guys today, and the first is, what is your favorite Star Wars video game and did it make the list? I'd also like to know what your favorite non-Star Wars video game is, because I know for at least me personally, my favorite video game is not Star Wars related. Finally, I'd like to hear about your dream Star Wars game. Say, Lucasfilm gives you the opportunity to make any video game you want. What direction do you take it? What kind of game is it? And what's it about? Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, may the Force be with you.